I spent 10 years working double shifts to pay for my husband's law degree, only to find out he was using his late nights at the office to set up a new life with my own sister. The smell of hospital-grade antiseptic usually feels like a comfort to me. It's the smell of order, of healing, of a world where I know exactly what my role is. But as I pulled into my driveway at 4:30 a.m. after a grueling 16-hour shift in the NICU, that smell felt like a lie. I was exhausted down to my marrow. My back ached from standing over incubators, and my head was thumping with the kind of rhythm that only comes from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I just wanted to crawl into bed next to Mark. I wanted him to pull me close, smelling like the expensive sandalwood soap I bought him for his birthday, and tell me that the partner track at his firm was worth all these lonely nights. But as I stepped into the mudroom, something was wrong. The house wasn't silent. There was a low, muffled sound coming from the kitchen, the sound of the espresso machine. Mark didn't usually get up until 7. I kicked off my clogs, moving quietly on the hardwood, thinking maybe he'd pulled an all-nighter on the Henderson case and I could surprise him with a hug. Instead, I was the one surprised. I stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. The light over the stove was on, casting a dim, amber glow over the island. Mark was there, dressed in his silk robe, but he wasn't alone. Rebecca, my 24-year-old half-sister, was sitting on the counter, her legs swinging. She was wearing one of Mark's oversized dress shirts, the one I'd bleached and pressed for his meeting on Monday. "We have to be careful, Mark," Rebecca whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the soft hiss of the steam. "Sarah isn't stupid. She's starting to ask why the joint account is dipping so low." Mark laughed. It was a sound I'd loved for a decade, but now it sounded like glass grinding in my ears. "Sarah is tired, Becca. I've made sure of that." Between the extra shifts I encouraged her to take and the gaslighting about the investment fees for the firm, she's too drained to look at a bank statement. Besides, the divorce papers are already drafted. By the time she realizes the money is gone, we'll be halfway to the villa in Spain. "And the house?" Rebecca asked, leaning in to kiss him. "The house is in my name, remember? A gift from my parents that I conveniently forgot to mention was never put into community property. She'll get a small settlement, a pat on the back, and a lot of memories. That's it." I stood in the shadows, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard I thought the wood might splinter. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was being incinerated. I had worked 3 jobs to put that man through school. I had skipped funerals, birthdays, and holidays to pay for his bar exam fees. I had let my own dreams of opening a private clinic sit on a shelf so he could chase his. And my sister, the girl I had practically raised after our mother passed, was helping him strip me of everything. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. That's what the old Sarah would have done. The Sarah who believed in fairness and emotions. But the woman standing in that hallway was someone new. I felt a cold, clinical calm wash over me, the same way it does when a code blue is called. My brain began to categorize the information. Fact 1. My marriage was a long-term con. Fact 2, my sister was a willing accomplice. Fact 3, my finances were being drained. Fact 4, I had approximately 3 weeks before they pulled the rug out from under me. I backed away silently, retreating to the mudroom. I grabbed my keys, stepped back out into the pre-dawn chill, and sat in my car. I watched the kitchen light turn off. I watched them walk upstairs together to the bed I'd paid for. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer, not yet. I called a man named Elias. He was the father of one of my former patients, a man who worked in high-level digital forensics and owed me a debt that money couldn't pay. I'd saved his daughter's life 3 years ago when her lungs were failing. "Elias," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's, "I need a favor. I need deep access to a private server. And I need to know where every cent of a community account has been moved in the last 18 months. And Elias, I need it to stay off the grid." "Sarah, is everything okay?" "No," I said, looking up at the darkened window of my bedroom. "But it's about to be very, very expensive for someone else." I drove back to the hospital. I didn't go inside. I sat in the parking lot and drafted a list. I didn't need a divorce. I needed a liquidation. Mark thought he was a brilliant lawyer, but he was a creature of ego. He assumed I was the nurturer, the woman who would cry and beg for an explanation. He had no idea that a nurse knows exactly where the pressure points are. I waited until 8 a.m., then I called my supervisor. "I need to pick up every overtime shift available for the next 2 weeks. Yes, I know I'm exhausted. Just give them to me." If Mark wanted me out of the house, I'd give him exactly what he wanted. I'd be the ghost he thought I was. While he and Rebecca played house, I would be building a digital and legal gallows. By the time I went back home that evening, the mask was firmly in place. I walked in, kissed Mark on the cheek, and apologized for being late. I even asked Rebecca how her job search was going, watching her squirm in her seat with a fake smile. "You look beat, honey," Mark said, pouring me a glass of wine. "Maybe you should take a nap." "I think I will," I said, taking the glass. I didn't drink it. I waited until he turned his back and poured it down the drain. I couldn't afford to be dull. Not now. I went to our home office, the one Mark told me was only for firm business. I knew the password. It was our wedding anniversary, a date he used for everything because he was too lazy to remember anything else. I slipped a small USB drive. Elias had dropped off at the hospital into the back of the tower. "Initialization complete," the screen whispered. I watched as the progress bar began to crawl. I was looking at his private folders. I saw the drafts of the divorce papers. I saw the photos of the villa in Spain. But then I saw something else. Something Mark hadn't mentioned to Rebecca. A series of emails to a high-profile firm in London. A job offer. And a second set of tickets. One for him and one for a woman named Elena. a senior partner at his firm. Mark wasn't just cheating on me with my sister. He was using my sister to bridge the gap until he could leave her behind too. He was playing everyone. I leaned back in the chair, a dark, jagged laugh bubbling up in my throat. Rebecca thought she was the prize. Mark thought he was the player. Neither of them realized they were just the patients on my table. And I was about to start the surgery. The house felt like a theatrical set, and every time I crossed the threshold, I had to remind myself to hit my cues. Being a nurse teaches you a lot about the human body, but it also teaches you how to keep a neutral face while someone is falling apart in front of you. Now, the person falling apart was my own life, and the mask was the only thing keeping me upright. For the next 4 days, I became a phantom. I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, then came home and played the part of the tired, oblivious wife. I'd sit on the sofa with Mark, letting him talk about his stressful day at the firm, while my mind was miles away, counting down the seconds until he went to sleep so I could check the data Elias was pulling from the cloud. "You're so quiet lately." "Sarah," Mark said one evening, swirling a glass of bourbon. He was looking at me with that patronizing tilt of his head, the one he used right before he told me I was overthinking something. "Are the shifts getting to you? Maybe you should talk to your supervisor about cutting back. I hate seeing you so drained." "I bet you do," I thought. "You hate seeing me awake enough to realize you're stealing my soul." "I'm just tired, Mark," I said, forcing a yawn. "The NICU has been heavy this week. We lost a twin on Tuesday." "It stays with you." That was a lie. We hadn't lost anyone. But I knew Mark. He couldn't handle real emotion. It made him uncomfortable. As expected, he cleared his throat, looked at his phone, and stood up. "Right. Well, try to get some sleep. I have to finish some filings for the Henderson case in the office. Don't wait up." I watched him walk toward the office, the room where he was currently plotting my financial execution. I waited exactly 20 minutes, then I slipped out of the house and drove to a small, greasy diner 3 blocks away. Elias was waiting in the back booth, a laptop open and a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as I slid into the seat, his expression a mix of pity and grim admiration. "I found the trail, Sarah," he said, turning the laptop toward me. "It's worse than the joint account. He's been funneling money through a shell company, registered in your sister's name, Rebecca's design studio. It doesn't exist. There are no clients, no portfolio, just a series of monthly transfers from your savings into a holding account in the Caymans." I stared at the screen. The numbers were staggering. Over $150,000 had been moved in the last 18 months. That was my inheritance from my grandmother. That was the emergency fund I'd built by working every holiday for 5 years. "And the firm?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Elias said, tapping a key. "Mark isn't a partner track star. He's actually under internal investigation for ethics violations. He's been overbilling clients and using the firm's expense accounts for consultation dinners that were actually dates with your sister and this other woman, Elena, the London job offer. It's not a promotion. It's an escape. He's planning to jump ship before the firm realizes he's been skimming their fees, too." I felt a cold shiver of realization. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a cornered rat. He was trying to burn everything down and fly away on a pile of stolen cash before the smoke reached the ceiling. "Can we stop the Cayman transfer?" I asked. "Technically, no, it's already in his name," Elias sighed. "But I found a back door. Mark used your social security number to co-sign the design studio business license without your knowledge. He thought it would protect him if things went south. He'd just claim you were the one running the shell, but because you're a co-signer, you have equal legal access to the business accounts." A slow, jagged smile spread across my face. Mark had tried to set me up as the fall girl, but in his arrogance, he'd handed me the keys to the vault. "How much is in the design studio account right now?" "84,000, Elias said. "The rest has already been moved to the Caymans." "Move it?" I said. "All of it. Move it to an escrow account in my name. But don't do it yet. I want him to see the balance one last time before he tries to withdraw it for his tickets to London." "What about Rebecca?" Elias asked. "She's going to be the one on the hook for the tax fraud if this goes public. Her name is on everything." I thought about the girl I'd taught to ride a bike, the girl I'd comforted after her first heartbreak, the girl who was currently sleeping in my sister's bed, dreaming of a life with my husband. She made her choice, Elias. Now she gets to live with the consequences. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called out sick. I drove to a high-end boutique and bought a dress that cost more than my monthly car payment, a sharp emerald green silk that made me look like a woman who didn't take orders. Then I drove to Mark's firm. I didn't go in as the supportive nurse wife with a brown bag lunch. I walked through the glass doors like I owned the building. "I'm here to see Elena Vance," I told the receptionist. "Do you have an appointment?" "Tell her Sarah Jenkins is here to discuss her travel arrangements for London. I think she'll make time." 2 minutes later, I was ushered into a corner office that smelled of expensive leather and ambition. Elena Vance was older than me, sharp-featured and impeccably dressed. She looked at me with a curiosity that wasn't entirely friendly. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I wasn't aware Mark had discussed our London expansion with you. It's quite a confidential matter." "Mark hasn't discussed it," I said, sitting down and crossing my legs. "But I've seen the tickets, both sets. The ones for you and Mark, and the ones for Mark and my sister, Rebecca." Elena's composure didn't just crack, it shattered. She sat back, her face turning a muddy shade of gray. I don't know what you're talking about." "Let's stop the charade, Elena. Mark is under investigation for overbilling. He's been using your firm's money to fund a lifestyle with my sister while promising you a new life in London. He's not a partner. He's a liability. And if I take this folder, the one with the shell, company receipts, and the double-booked travel itineraries to your senior partners, your career ends along with his." Elena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" "I don't want your job and I don't want your money," I said. I want the files on Mark's ethics investigation. Everything you have on his overbilling. In exchange, I'll give you the evidence you need to fire him for cause and protect the firm's reputation. You get to be the hero who caught the rogue lawyer, and I get the one thing I need for my divorce. Leverage, Elena whispered. Justice, I corrected her. I left the office with a digital drive tucked in my purse. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rebecca. Hey sis, thinking of you. Do you think you could pick up an extra shift tonight? Mark and I wanted to go over some legal paperwork for the estate at the house and didn't want to be disturbed. Love you. I looked at the text and felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. They wanted me out of the house so they could celebrate their victory early. Sure, Becca, I typed back. Stay as long as you want. I won't be home until morning. I drove to the bank. I sat in the parking lot and called Elias. Do it, Elias. Drain the design studio account now. It's done, Sarah. The balance is zero. Now send the anonymous tip to the IRS regarding the unreported income of Rebecca's design studio. And Elias, make sure the email to the senior partners at the firm is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I sat in my car, watching the people go about their normal lives. I felt like I was standing in the center of a hurricane, the only calm point in a world I was about to tear apart. I had been the nurse for too long. It was time to be the surgeon. And the first thing I was going to remove was the cancer that had been eating my life for 10 years. I didn't go to the hospital. I drove to a hotel, checked into a suite with a view of the city, and ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne on the menu. The surgery had begun, and I wasn't going to stop until every lie was cut out. The champagne was cold, but it didn't take the edge off the heat simmering under my skin. I sat in that high-rise hotel room, watching the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that just a few miles away, my husband and my sister were probably clinking glasses of my wine, celebrating a future they'd never see. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a notification from the home security app. Mark had disabled the indoor cameras, something he only did when he thought he was being discreet. Little did he know, Leo had installed a secondary, independent loop weeks ago that Mark couldn't touch. I opened the feed. There they were. They were in our living room. Mark was showing Rebecca the divorce papers he'd drafted for me. He was laughing, pointing at a line in the contract, likely the measly settlement he thought I'd be grateful for. Rebecca was curled up on the sofa, clutching a pillow, looking at him with an expression of such adoration. It made me want to weep for the girl she used to be. She's going to sign it, Mark. Rebecca's voice came through the laptop speakers, tinny but clear. She's so tired, she'll do anything just to sleep. She trusts you. Trust is a luxury she can't afford anymore, Mark replied, leaning down to kiss her. By tomorrow night, the design studio funds will be in the Cayman account and we'll be at the airport. Let her have the memories. We'll have the life. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to see anymore. The design studio funds were already gone, sitting in a secure escrow account that Mark's credentials could no longer reach. At 9 p.m., I sent the first text. Mark, I forgot my charger at home. I'm going to swing by in 10 minutes. Are you still at the office? I watched the screen. Mark jumped off the sofa like he'd been struck by lightning. He started frantically straightening the pillows, whispering to Rebecca to hide in the guest room. I waited 5 minutes, then sent the follow-up. Actually, never mind. My coworker had a spare. Don't want to interrupt your work. Love you. I watched him collapse back onto the sofa, wiping sweat from his forehead. I wanted him on edge. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in, even if he didn't know why yet. The next morning, the real storm began. I woke up early, dressed in a sharp blazer, and drove to the one place Mark felt most powerful, the law firm. I arrived at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the partner's scheduled email from Elias. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching Mark pull in. He looked smug, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror, probably thinking this was the last day he'd ever have to step foot in this building. At exactly 9:01 a.m., I walked into the lobby. The atmosphere had shifted. The usual hum of the office was replaced by a frantic, hushed energy. I saw the senior partners, men who usually ignored me, huddled near the glass conference room, their faces red with fury. Mark was at his desk, staring at his computer screen. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He was staring at the email from Elias, the one that detailed every cent he'd skimmed, every business dinner he'd faked, and the evidence of the shell company. Mark Jenkins. My office, now. The voice of the senior partner, Mr. Henderson, thundered through the hallway. Mark stood up, his legs looking like they were made of jelly. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on me as I stood by the elevators. I didn't hide. I didn't look sad. I stood tall and gave him a slow, deliberate nod. He knew. In that second, he knew the tired nurse had been the one holding the scalpel the whole time. I didn't wait to watch him get fired. I had a more personal appointment. I drove back to the house. Rebecca's car was still in the driveway. She was probably upstairs, packing her bags for the surprise trip Mark had promised her. I walked through the front door, not bothering to be quiet. Becca? I called out, my voice sweet and steady. She came to the top of the stairs, looking startled. She was wearing my favorite silk robe, the one my mother gave me before she died. Sarah, I thought you were at the hospital, she stammered, clutching the robe closed. I decided to take a personal day, I said, walking up the stairs toward her. I thought we could talk about the design studio and about the IRS. Rebecca turned pale. What are you talking about? I know about the shell company. Becca, I know Mark used your name to hide the money he stole from me. And I know the IRS received an anonymous tip this morning about $150 SEO and unreported income under your social security number. Sarah, please. Mark said it was legal. He said it was for our future. She started to cry, the big, fat, theatrical tears that used to work on me every time. There is no future, Becca, I said, stepping into her space. The account is empty. I moved the money back into my name last night. Mark is being fired from the firm as we speak. And the London job? It was never for you. He had a second set of tickets for Elena Vance. I pulled out my phone and showed her the email exchange between Mark and Elena. Rebecca's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. She looked at the screen, at the words Mark had written about her, calling her a temporary distraction and a useful shield. The girl who had betrayed me for love finally saw the man she'd traded her soul for. He told me he loved me, she whispered, collapsing onto the top step. He loves money, Becca. And he loves himself. You were just a tool he used to break me. But you ended up breaking yourself. Just then, the front door slammed open. Mark burst in, his hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He looked like a man who had just seen the end of the world. Sarah, he roared, seeing me at the top of the stairs. What have you done? My accounts? The firm? Everything is gone. Not everything, Mark, I said, looking down at him with a cold, clinical detachment. You still have the divorce papers you drafted. The ones where you said I deserved a small settlement? I think they'll look great in court, especially when my lawyer introduces the evidence of your criminal fraud and the life insurance policy you tried to take out on me last month. Mark stopped. His eyes darted to Rebecca, then back to me. The charming lawyer was gone. In his place was a pathetic, broken man who realized he'd been outplayed by the woman he'd spent a decade underestimating. I'll sue you, he hissed, though there was no weight behind it. With what money, Mark? You're broke. You're unemployed. And by the time the IRS finishes with Rebecca, you'll be the primary target of a federal embezzlement investigation. I'm not just leaving you. I'm erasing you. I walked past Rebecca, who was still sobbing on the floor, and headed to our bedroom. I grabbed the suitcase I'd packed 2 days ago. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my mother's jewelry, and the sense of self I'd almost lost. I stopped at the front door, looking back at the house I'd worked so hard to pay for. The locks are being changed this afternoon, I said. The house is in your name, Mark. You were right about that. But the mortgage? That was paid from our joint account. My lawyer has already filed a lien. You have until 5 p.m. to get your things. And Rebecca, you might want to call a tax attorney. You're going to need one. I walked out into the bright morning sun. For the first time in 10 years, my back didn't ache. My head didn't thrum. I felt light. I felt powerful. The surgery was over, the cancer was gone, and I was finally truly awake. I spent that first night of my new life in a hotel room, but I didn't sleep. You'd think that after the adrenaline of the confrontation, I would have crashed. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the city lights, feeling a strange, humming vibration in my bones. It was the sound of a person who had spent 10 years living in a cage, finally stepping out into the open air. The silence was the best part. No snoring husband, no frantic mental tallying of how many hours I could sleep before my next shift, and no nagging feeling that I was being watched or lied to. At 7 a.m., my phone began to blow up. It was Mark. Dozens of texts. They started out angry, threatening to call the police, accusing me of theft, calling me every name in the book. Then, as the hour passed and he realized I wasn't responding, they shifted. They became desperate. He begged me to be reasonable. He told me we could work it out. He even had the nerve to say that he'd only done what he did because he felt neglected by my long hours at the hospital. The classic narcissist's move. Flip the script so the victim is the villain. I deleted the thread without reading the rest. Then came the calls from Rebecca. I let them go to voicemail. Sarah, please, the police are here. They're asking about the design studio and some tax documents. Mark left, Sarah. He packed a bag and just drove away. He won't answer my calls. Please, you're my sister. You have to help me. I listened to her voice. The high-pitched, shaky panic of a girl who had finally realized that the man she traded her family for was exactly who I said he was. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had abandoned her the second the ship started to sink. I felt a momentary pang in my chest, the ghost of the protective older sister I used to be, but I pushed it down. I hadn't put her in that position. She had walked into it with her eyes wide open and my husband's hand in hers. I called Elias. How's the digital fallout? I asked. Total meltdown, Elias said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The senior partners at the firm aren't just firing him. They're filing a formal complaint with the bar association. He'll be disbarred by the end of the month. And the IRS? They've frozen Rebecca's personal accounts for the investigation. Mark tried to wire the last of the emergency cash out of his personal checking this morning, but I flagged the transaction as suspicious. The bank held it. Where is he now? He's at a motel near the airport. I'm tracking his phone. He's trying to find a way to get to London without the firm's tickets, but he's essentially flagged. He's stuck, Sarah. He's a lawyer who can't practice, a rich man with no money, and a husband with no home. Good, I said, but we're not done. He still thinks he has the house. The house was Mark's pride and joy. It was a sprawling colonial in the best school district, a symbol of the status he craved. He'd kept it in his name through a legal loophole, and he thought that even if everything else failed, he could sell it and walk away with $250,000 in equity. Is the appraiser still scheduled for 10? I asked. Yep. And your lawyer, Mr. Vance, is meeting them there. I checked out of the hotel and drove to my house. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and watched. At 10:15, a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped Mr. Vance. the bulldog of divorce attorneys. He was the kind of man who ate lawyers like Mark for breakfast. He met the appraiser at the door. Because I had filed a lien based on the marital contributions, the thousands of dollars I'd paid into the mortgage from my nursing salary, the house was effectively in legal limbo. Mark couldn't sell it, he couldn't refinance it, and he couldn't even enter it without a court representative present. A few minutes later, Mark's beat-up old SUV, the one he used for incognito trips, screeched into the driveway. He jumped out looking frantic. He tried to shove past Mr. Vance to get into the house. "This is my property," I heard him yell from across the street. "Get the hell off my lawn." Mr. Vance didn't even flinch. He just held up a folder of papers. "Mr. Jenkins, you are currently under a temporary restraining order initiated by the state regarding the investigation of financial fraud. Furthermore, my client has filed a lis pendens on this property. You enter that house, and I'll have the sheriff here in 3 minutes to arrest you for trespassing on a contested marital asset." Mark froze. He looked at the house, then at the lawyer, and then he looked around the neighborhood. He saw me sitting in my car. Our eyes met. I didn't look away. I didn't roll down the window. I just sat there. The woman who had spent 10 years making his life easy, watching him realize that his life was now officially impossible. He didn't scream this time. He just slumped. The alpha lawyer looked like a deflated balloon. He got back into his car and drove away, his tires kicking up the gravel I'd picked out myself 3 summers ago. I felt a tap on my window. It was Rebecca. I hadn't seen her approach. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were swollen, and she was wearing the same clothes from the day before. She looked like a child who had been lost in the woods. I rolled down the window, but I didn't unlock the door. "Sarah, please," she sobbed, leaning against the car. "He took everything. He took the cash I had in my dresser. He took the jewelry he bought me. The stuff that was supposedly mine. I have nothing. I can't even pay for a lawyer for the IRS stuff. You should have thought about that before you helped him steal from me." "Becca," I said, my voice flat. "I didn't know he was stealing. He told me it was your idea. He said you wanted to hide assets for tax reasons. I believed him because I loved him. You believed him because it was convenient," I corrected her. "You wanted the lifestyle. You wanted the excitement of the secret. You wanted to feel like you were better than your boring sister, the nurse. Well, here's the reality. Being a nurse means you see the truth. And the truth is, you're an adult who made a choice to betray the only person who ever truly looked out for you. What am I supposed to do?" She wailed. "Call a public defender. Move back into Dad's old place if you have to. But don't ever call me again. I'm not your nurse anymore, Becca. I'm not here to fix your wounds." I rolled up the window and drove away. I headed back to the hospital. I wasn't on shift, but I went to the NICU anyway. I stood outside the glass, watching the nurses move with that quiet, focused grace. I saw a young mother holding her baby for the first time, her face a mask of pure, uncomplicated love. That was the world I belonged in. A world where things were built, not torn down. A world where people cared for each other instead of consuming each other. I went to my supervisor's office. "I'm taking a leave of absence," I told her. 2 weeks. "Are you okay, Sarah? We heard about—" "Well, the rumors are flying." "I'm better than okay," I said, handing her a formal letter. "I'm going to go find the woman I was before I met Mark Jenkins. I think she's still in there somewhere." I walked out of the hospital and into the afternoon sun. I had $84,000 in a new account, a house tied up in a legal battle I was destined to win, and a future that belonged entirely to me. But as I reached my car, I saw a man standing by the driver's side door. He wasn't Mark, and he wasn't a lawyer. He was wearing a dark suit and holding a manila envelope. "Sarah Jenkins?" he asked. "Yes?" "You've been served," he said, handing me the envelope. I opened it, expecting more divorce drama. But it wasn't from Mark. It was from the hospital's Board of Ethics, regarding an anonymous tip, allegations of professional misconduct and theft of controlled substances. My heart stopped. I looked at the envelope, then at the process server, walking away. Mark wasn't just trying to take my money. He was going after the only thing I had left. My career. He'd planted drugs in my locker or altered the logs. He was trying to take my license. The surgery wasn't over. He'd gone for the heart. I stared at the letter from the Board of Ethics until the words blurred into a white-hot smear of ink. Theft of controlled substances, professional misconduct. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. In the world of nursing, these weren't just accusations. They were the death penalty for a career. Mark knew that. He knew that even if he lost the house, even if he lost his job at the firm, he could still pull the ground out from under me. If I lost my license, I lost my ability to fight him. I'd be broke, unemployed, and disgraced. Exactly where he wanted me. "You arrogant, predictable coward," I whispered, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and fear. I didn't panic. I went back into the hospital, my heels clicking on the linoleum with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I didn't go to my locker. I went straight to the security office. I knew the head of security, a retired cop named Miller, whose grandson I'd looked after in the NICU for 3 months. "Sarah, what are you doing back?" "I thought you were starting your leave," Miller said, looking up from his bank of monitors. "Miller, I need you to do me a favor. A life or death favor," I said, leaning over his desk. "Check the footage for the staff locker room and the medication dispensary for the last 48 hours. Specifically, look for anyone who shouldn't be there, or anyone who looks like they're struggling with a lock that isn't theirs." Miller's eyes narrowed. He didn't ask questions. He knew my reputation, and he knew something was wrong. He spent 20 minutes scrubbing through high-definition feeds while I stood there, my nails digging into my palms. "There," Miller said, pausing the screen. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Mark, it was Rebecca. She was wearing an old set of my scrubs, a pair I'd left at the house weeks ago. She had her hair tucked into a surgical cap and a mask over her face, but I knew that walk. I knew the way she fidgeted with her collar when she was nervous. She was using my old ID badge, the one I'd lost a month ago, to swipe into the dispensary. She didn't take much, just a few vials of high-end painkillers, but she made sure to do it under my login. She hadn't just betrayed me for love. She was committing a felony to help Mark finish me off. Can you save that? I asked, my voice barely a thread. And the footage of her leaving the building and getting into a car? I've got it all. Sarah, including the license plate of the SUV that picked her up. It's registered to a Mark Jenkins. I walked out of the security office with a thumb drive that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Mark thought he was playing a game of chess, but he was playing with people's lives. He had sent my baby sister, the girl I had protected since she was a toddler, to do his dirty work, knowing that if she got caught, she'd be the one facing prison time while he claimed plausible deniability. I drove to the motel where Elias said Mark was staying. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he'd failed. I found his SUV in the back of the parking lot. I walked up to room 214 and kicked the door. Not a polite knock, a heavy resounding strike that echoed through the breezeway. The door opened a crack, held by the security chain. Mark's face appeared, looking haggard and paranoid. When he saw it was me, a slow, smug grin spread across his lips. Come to beg for your career back, Sarah? I told you that you should have been reasonable. Now you're going to be a cautionary tale for the board. Open the door, Mark, I said, my voice dead and cold. Or I'll scream fire and have the entire department here in 5 minutes. We both know you can't afford any more eyes on you. He hissed through his teeth but unlatched the chain. I stepped into the room. It smelled of cheap cigarettes and desperation. Rebecca was sitting on the edge of the unmade bed, her eyes red-rimmed. When she saw me, she let out a small, pathetic sob. Sarah, I didn't want to. He told me it was the only way to get the money back. He said you wouldn't get in real trouble, just a suspension. Shut up, Rebecca, Mark snapped. He turned back to me, crossing his arms. You've got nothing. Sarah, the logs show your ID. The locker search found the stash. You're done. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the video Miller had given me. I held it up so they could both see the crystal clear footage of Rebecca swiping into the dispensary and the SUV waiting for her in the lot. The color drained from Mark's face so fast it was almost comical. Rebecca let out a wail and buried her face in her hands. This isn't just a board of ethics issue anymore, Mark, I said. This is felony theft of controlled substances. It's conspiracy. It's burglary. And since you used a vehicle to transport her and the stolen goods, it's a federal interest. You won't call the cops, Mark stammered, his bravado crumbling. If you do, your sister goes to jail for 5 years. You've spent your whole life protecting her. You don't have the stomach to destroy her. I looked at Rebecca. I saw the girl I'd comforted after her first scraped knee. I saw the girl who had sat on my lap and promised we'd always be best friends. And then I saw the woman who had helped my husband drug my life and steal my future. You're right, Mark, I said. I've spent my life protecting her, and that's exactly why she needs to face this. Because as long as she has someone like me to clean up her messes, she'll keep letting monsters like you use her. I looked at Rebecca. I called the police from the car, Becca. They're 5 minutes away. No! Rebecca screamed, lunging for me, but Mark shoved her aside. He was already reaching for his bag, looking for a way out. It's over, Mark, I said, blocking the door. Elias sent the final audit of the design studio, accounts to the district attorney 10 minutes ago. Between the embezzlement, the tax fraud, and now the drug theft, there isn't a lawyer in this city who can save you. Not even you. The wail of sirens began to rise in the distance. Mark looked at the window, then at the door, then at me. For the first time in 10 years, he looked at me and didn't see a tired nurse. He saw exactly who I was, the person who held his life in her hands and was finally ready to let go. The police burst into the room 3 minutes later. I stood back as they handcuffed Mark. He didn't go quietly. He screamed and cursed, blaming me, blaming Rebecca, blaming the world. It was a pathetic, ugly display. Then they moved toward Rebecca. She didn't fight. She just looked at me, her face wet with tears. Sarah, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, Becca, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. And that's why I'm doing this, because I love you enough to let you hit the bottom. Maybe when you get up, you'll finally decide to be someone worth knowing. I walked out of the motel room as they led them away in separate cars. I stood in the parking lot, the cold night air filling my lungs. My career was safe. The footage and my immediate reporting of the theft would clear my name with the board. My money was in escrow. My house was in probate. But as I drove back to the hotel, I realized the house was just wood and stone. The money was just numbers. The real revenge wasn't in taking what they had. It was in becoming the person they thought I'd never be. I pulled over to the side of the road and cried. Not for Mark, not for the marriage. I cried for the girl I used to be, and for the woman I had to become to survive. The weeks following the arrests felt like a slow, deep exhale. The legal system, usually a grinding and indifferent machine, moved with surprising speed when presented with the mountain of evidence Elias and I had gathered. Mark's brilliant legal mind couldn't argue with high-definition security, footage, and a digital paper trail that led directly to his offshore aspirations. I sat in the back of the courtroom for the final hearing. Mark looked small in his orange jumpsuit. The expensive haircuts and the tailored suits were gone, replaced by a buzzed scalp and a look of permanent, simmering resentment. He didn't look like a high-powered lawyer anymore. He looked like exactly what he was. a thief who had run out of people to rob. He was sentenced to 7 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Because he was a lawyer, the judge was particularly harsh about his calculated exploitation of the legal system. Rebecca, because she had no prior record and had cooperated fully with the prosecution against Mark, received 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. As they led Mark out, he tried to catch my eye. He probably wanted to see a flicker of regret or a tear of lingering affection. I didn't give him either. I simply looked through him, as if he were a window into a room I no longer occupied. Rebecca was released into the custody of our father. When she walked out of the courthouse, she stood on the sidewalk for a long time looking at me. I could see the old Rebecca in there, the one who wanted me to fix everything, but I stayed by my car. I didn't offer a ride. I didn't offer a hug. I just gave her a small, sad nod. She had a long road ahead to earn back even a shred of the trust she'd burned, and for the first time in our lives, she had to walk it alone. A month later, I stood in my kitchen. The design studio funds, the $150,000 mark, had tried to steal, had been fully restored to me, plus a significant portion of the home equity after the forced sale. I had used that money to do the one thing I'd been putting off for a decade. I wasn't a tired nurse anymore. I was a business owner. I'd purchased a small, sun-drenched space in the historic district. It wasn't a massive clinic, but it was mine. The Jenkins Pediatric Wellness Center. It was a place for kids who needed more than just medicine. It was for the families who fell through the cracks of the big hospital system. On the morning of the grand opening, I was adjusting the sign on the front door when a familiar car pulled up. It was Elias. He got out holding a large bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. "You actually did it," he said, looking at the building with a wide smile. "I've seen a lot of people get revenge, Sarah. Usually, they just end up as bitter as the people who hurt them. But you turned a demolition into a construction site." "I had a good consultant," I said, taking the flowers. "How's your daughter doing?" "Healthy, happy. She's starting kindergarten next week. She wants to come see her favorite nurse." "Tell her she's always welcome here," I said. I walked back inside my clinic. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. There were books on the shelves and toys in the corner. It was a space built on honesty, hard work, and the belief that you can always start over if you have the courage to cut out the rot. I sat at my new desk and opened my laptop. There was an email from my lawyer. The divorce was final. The house was sold. The last tie to Mark Jenkins had been severed. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. It wasn't a photo of my wedding or a family portrait. It was a photo of me on the day I graduated nursing school. I looked young, hopeful, and fiercely determined. For 10 years, I'd let a man tell me that woman didn't exist anymore. I'd let him convince me that I was just a supporting character in his story. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass of the clinic door, I saw her again. She was older, wiser, and she had a few scars she didn't have before, but she was definitely back. And this time, she wasn't building a life for anyone else. She was building it for herself. I turned over the open sign on the door. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't checking the cameras. I wasn't doubting my memory. I was just Sarah. And that was more than enough. If you found Sarah's journey as empowering as we did, help us reach more people by hitting that like button to show your support for Sarah's new beginning, subscribing to AITA Stories so you never miss a gripping saga of betrayal and redemption, clicking the notification bell to be the first to know when the next karma-filled story drops. Thank you for watching, for sharing, and for being part of this community. Life may have its twists, but remember, the best revenge is living a life you're proud of. We'll see you in the next story.